They didn't just cut down a tree. They cut down the last thing my wife and I ever built together. And somehow, they thought they could turn it into furniture and sell it like it meant nothing. So yeah, I walked into their showroom a week later and took every single piece back legally, right in front of their champagne glasses and their rich clients. And I've never seen a man unravel that fast in my life. But to understand why I went that far, you gotta understand what that tree actually was to me, because it wasn't just wood, and it sure as hell wasn't for sale. I'd been gone for 6 months, working a contract down in Antarctica, doing cold region infrastructure surveys. The kind of job where everything's white, silent, and so empty, it makes you forget what green even looks like. It pays well, though, and after my wife passed 3 years ago, I figured staying busy was better than sitting in that house alone, with too many memories and not enough distractions. Her name was Claire, and we weren't one of those flashy couples. We didn't travel the world or anything like that, but we built things, small things, real things, stuff that lasted. The biggest one was that oak tree. We planted it back in 1989, a few months after we got married, right near the edge of the property, about 6 feet in from the boundary line. I remember, because we argued about the placement for almost an hour. Claire wanted it closer to the house, so she could see it from the kitchen window. I said it needed space to grow, that someday it'd be massive, and we'd need room for the roots. She rolled her eyes, said I was thinking like an engineer instead of a husband. Then she kissed me, and said, "Fine, we'll do it your way. But if it grows crooked, it's your fault." It didn't grow crooked, it grew strong, straight, and by the time I left for that last contract, it was pushing 80 feet tall, wide enough that you could sit under it and feel like you were in a different world entirely. After Claire passed, that tree became, I don't know, a place I could still talk to her, I guess. Sounds crazy when you say it out loud, but if you've ever lost someone like that, you get it. I had her memorial service right there under its branches. Just close friends, some family, nothing fancy. There's a photo from that day, me standing next to the trunk, one hand on the bark, like I'm trying to hold on to something that isn't there anymore. That tree held more memories than the house did. It was the only thing that felt alive. So when I got back in early March, first thing I did after dropping my bags was walk straight out there. Didn't even take my jacket off. Still had that cold wind in my bones from the flight. Just needed to see something familiar, something grounding. And for a second, I thought I was in the wrong place, like my brain just wasn't lining things up right, because the light hit differently. The space felt too open. And then I saw it. A stump, fresh cut, pale wood exposed, saw marks still sharp around the edges, like it hadn't even had time to dry out yet. No storm damage, no rot, no sign of disease, just clean, deliberate cuts. 43 years of growth gone just like that. I stood there longer than I probably should have, not saying anything, not moving, just staring at it, trying to make sense of how something that big could disappear so completely. And then the anger hit, not fast, not explosive, just this slow, heavy pressure building in my chest, like something tightening around my ribs, because trees don't just get cut down by accident, especially not ones that size, and definitely not on private property. Now my land backs up against what used to be an old mechanic's garage. Been there forever, rusted doors, oil stains, the usual. But sometime while I was gone, it got turned into one of those high-end artisan furniture places. You know the type, exposed brick, polished concrete floors, big windows, everything labeled handcrafted and bespoke, like that justifies charging 5 figures for a table. The new name was Iron Veil Woodcraft, rail clean branding, minimalist logo. Probably spent more on marketing than the old garage made in a decade. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but it didn't take a genius to connect the dots. Brand new furniture shop next door, massive oak tree suddenly gone. Yeah, I had a pretty good idea where to start looking. So I walked over there, still wearing the same boots I'd been traveling in. Probably looked like hell, hadn't shaved, hair all over the place, but I didn't care. The place smelled like fresh wood and varnish the second I stepped inside. That clean, expensive scent they probably think makes everything feel premium. And I'll admit, for a moment, I just looked around taking it in. Big showroom, carefully lit pieces, everything spaced out like it was in a gallery instead of a store. Then I saw it. A live-edge dining table, center of the room, spotlighted like it was the main attraction. Price tag read $12,000 like it was nothing. The grain on it caught my eye first. Something about the pattern felt familiar. The way the lines curved near the edge, a slight twist in the growth rings. I stepped closer, ran my hand along the surface, smooth, perfectly finished. But underneath that polish, I could feel it. Recognition. And then I moved to a smaller piece, a coffee table off to the side, and that's when my stomach dropped, because right there, just barely visible under the finish, like a ghost that refused to disappear, were our initials. Not clean anymore, not sharp like they used to be. They tried to sand it down, erase it, but you could still see the shadow of it in the wood. J and C, carved inside a heart, dated 1990. I remember the day we did that. Claire laughing because I said it was cliché, and she said, "Good, then it'll last forever." Yeah, forever. I stood there staring at that mark, and everything else in the room just kind of faded out. The prices, the lights, the music they had playing in the background, all of it didn't matter, because now I knew exactly what had happened. They didn't just cut down a tree. They took something that mattered, something that had history, something that belonged to someone else, and they turned it into inventory. And that's the moment I decided I wasn't just going to let this go. I didn't make a scene right away, and that's probably the part that surprises people the most when they hear this story. Because yeah, I was angry. More than angry, honestly. But it wasn't the kind that explodes. It was the kind that settles in and starts thinking, starts calculating. I'd spent too many years working in environments where one bad decision could cost you everything. So I knew better than to just start yelling in the middle of their showroom. Even though part of me really wanted to flip that $12,000 table on its side and ask them how bespoke it felt then. Instead, I just kept walking, slow, quiet, taking it all in like I was just another customer with too much time on his hands. There were at least 10 pieces in that room I could recognize, not because I'd seen them before, but because I knew that tree the way you know a face you've looked at for decades. The grain patterns, the knots, the subtle bends in the lines, it was all there, just cut up, rearranged, repackaged, and priced like luxury. A woman behind the front desk smiled at me, asked if I needed help, and I just nodded toward the back and said, "I'm looking for the owner." She hesitated for a second, probably clocking that I didn't look like their usual clientele, then pointed me toward a glass office near the rear of the showroom. That's where I met him. His name was Adrian Cole, mid-40s maybe, tall, well put together in that intentional kind of way, beard trimmed just enough to look rugged without actually being inconvenient. Wearing one of those aprons that's more for show than for work. He was on the phone when I walked in talking about delivery timelines and client expectations, using words like curated and statement piece, like he'd practiced them in a mirror. He held up a finger signaling me to wait, then finished his call like nothing in the world was wrong, like he wasn't standing 10 feet away from stolen property. When he finally hung up, he gave me a polite smile, the kind you give when you expect a sale. "What can I do for you?" he asked. I didn't sit down. "That wood out there, where'd you get it?" He didn't even blink. "We source all of our materials locally when possible. Premium white oak, sustainably harvested, fully permitted." "From where?" I asked again. He leaned back slightly, still calm, still confident. "From the adjacent property, actually. Beautiful specimen, perfect for what we do. Everything was handled legally." I just stared at him for a second, then said, "You mean my property?" That's when there was the smallest shift in his expression. Not panic, not guilt, just a quick recalibration. "If you have concerns," he said a little more measured now, "you're welcome to discuss them with our legal team. We have all the proper documentation." I let out a breath, slow, steady. Funny thing about that, I've got 7 acres of land, and not once have I signed anything giving you permission to cut down an 80-foot oak tree sitting 6 foot inside my boundary line." He folded his hands on the desk like this was just another negotiation. We worked with a third-party contractor who assured us the tree was on accessible land and cleared for harvest. We rely on professionals for that process. "Yeah," I said, nodding slightly, "and I rely on property lines." There was a pause there, just a second too long, and I could tell he was already shifting the conversation away from responsibility. "Regardless," he continued, "the material has already been processed, and several pieces have been sold. If there was an error, it's something that can be addressed through the appropriate channels." "Sold?" I repeated, glancing back toward the showroom. "So that table, 12 grand, where's it going?" "California," he said almost proudly. "Private client. It ships next week." I gave a small nod like I was considering something, then my eyes caught a poster mounted near the office door. Clean design, same branding as everything else, bold letters across the top. "Spring Showcase Event, Saturday, 10 new pieces debuting, press invited, champagne reception for serious buyers. 4 days away." And that's when everything clicked into place. Because up until that moment, this was just a problem, a serious one, sure, but still something you'd normally handle through lawyers, paperwork, months of back and forth. But that poster, that event, that was a deadline, a very public, very expensive deadline. I looked back at Adrian, still sitting there like he had everything under control, and for the first time since I walked in, I smiled. "All right," I said, "I'll take it up with your legal team." He nodded, satisfied, already mentally moving on. "They'll be happy to assist." "I'm sure they will," I replied, then turned and walked out. The second I stepped outside, the smile dropped, because now I wasn't just angry. I had a plan. I went straight home and pulled every document I had, and I mean everything. Property deed, original survey maps, updated boundary confirmations, even old aerial photos from years back that showed the tree clearly standing where it always had. I dug out photo albums, the kind people don't keep anymore, flipping through pages until I found what I needed. Claire and me on our wedding day. That oak tree behind us, smaller back then, but unmistakable. Another photo from the memorial service, the branches stretching out above us like a canopy. I laid it all out on the table, piece by piece, building a timeline, a case, something solid. Then I made a call. A few years back I'd worked on a research project involving reclaimed materials, and we partnered with a salvage company that specialized in recovery and transport of large assets. The kind of people who could show up with trucks and move half a building if you needed them to. Not exactly your average moving service. The guy who answered was named Rick, same as I remembered, still straight to the point. "Been a while," he said. "Yeah," I replied, "I've got a situation." I explained it to him. Not the emotional part, not Claire, not the memories, just the facts. Tree cut without permission, wood processed into high-value goods, potential legal recovery. There was a pause on the line, then he let out a low whistle. "You're talking about reclaiming finished inventory?" "I am." "You got paperwork to back it up?" "I will." Another pause. "And you're serious about this?" I looked down at the photo of Claire, her hand resting against the bark of that tree, smiling, like she knew something I didn't. "Yeah," I said quietly, "I am." "All right then," Rick replied. "If you can get legal clearance, we'll be ready." That night I barely slept. Not because I was unsure, but because everything was lining up a little too well, and I knew once I started this, there was no walking it back. This wasn't just about getting compensated. This wasn't about a quiet settlement or a check in the mail. This was going to be public, disruptive, the kind of thing people talk about. And maybe that's what it needed to be. Over the next couple of days, I worked with a local attorney, someone who knew property law inside and out. And once he saw the evidence, the surveys, the photos, the clear boundary lines, his tone shifted from cautious to very interested. "They don't have a leg to stand on," he said at one point, flipping through the documents. "If what you're saying is accurate, this isn't just a civil issue. This could cross into criminal territory." "I'm not looking to drag this out," I told him. I just want what's mine. He nodded slowly. Then we moved fast. And that's exactly what we did. By Friday afternoon, we had enough to file for an emergency court order, seizure of stolen property, supported by documentation, supported by expert consultation. He even brought in a forensic arborist, a specialist who could match wood grain patterns, growth rings, identify specific trees from processed lumber. I didn't even know that was a thing before this. Turns out, it is, and it's incredibly precise. Saturday morning was set. 9 a.m. they'd be setting up for their big showcase. Champagne on ice, cheese plates arranged, everything polished and perfect. 10 a.m. I'd be walking in with the sheriff and 3 trucks. Saturday morning came quicker than I expected. Or maybe I just didn't sleep enough for it to feel real. I'm not sure, but I remember standing in my kitchen with a cup of coffee that had already gone cold, staring out toward where that tree used to be. Just the stump sitting there like a reminder, and thinking, this is it. Once this starts, there's no version of the day where things go back to normal. Not for them, and honestly, not for me either. By 8:30, I was already in my truck, documents in a folder on the passenger seat, the court order sitting right on top like it carried more weight than paper should. I met the sheriff about 10 minutes later, just down the road, a calm guy named Walker, the kind of person who doesn't say much unless there's something worth saying. He glanced through the paperwork one more time, nodded, then looked over at me. "You sure you want to do this today?" he asked. I thought about that for a second, about Claire, about that tree, about walking into that empty space and realizing someone had decided it was worth more as a product than as a memory. "Yeah," I said, "I'm sure." We pulled up to Ironvale a little before 9 o'clock, and sure enough, they were already in full prep mode. Through the big front windows, I could see staff moving around, adjusting lights, straightening tags, setting out trays like they were about to host something important, which I guess they were. There was a kind of excitement in the air, even from outside, like they knew this event was going to put them on the map. And in a way, it did. We waited until just after 10 o'clock. That was the part one insisted on. Not before they were ready. Not quietly. Not behind the scenes. Right when everything was set. When the room looked exactly the way they wanted people to see it. Because if they were going to build something off what they took from me, then they were going to lose it the same way, in full view. At exactly 10:02, we walked in. The sound of the door opening didn't turn many heads at first, just a couple of staff members glancing over, probably expecting early guests. But then they saw the sheriff. Then they saw me. And you could feel the shift almost instantly, like the temperature in the room dropped a few degrees. Adrian was near the center of the showroom, adjusting something on that same dining table. And when he looked up and saw us, there was a moment, just a flicker, where he realized this wasn't a conversation anymore. "Morning," I said, calm, almost casual. Sheriff Walker stepped forward, already pulling out the paperwork. "We have a court order for the immediate seizure of property identified as unlawfully obtained materials," he said, voice steady, official, leaving no room for interpretation. You could hear a glass clink somewhere in the background. Someone had just set down a champagne flute a little too hard. Adrian straightened up, eyes moving between me and the sheriff. "There has to be some kind of misunderstanding," he said. But the confidence from a few days ago, it wasn't there anymore. "Not fully." "There isn't," I replied. Walker handed him the order. "You're required to comply, effective immediately." And right on cue, the trucks pulled in. 3 of them. You could hear the engines before you saw them. Heavy, deliberate, pulling up out front like they belonged there. Rick stepped out of the first one. Same no-nonsense expression. Gave me a small nod. Then started directing his crew like they'd done this 100 times before. "Everything made from that oak goes," I said, not raising my voice, just stating it. The forensic arborist was already there too. A quiet woman named Dr. Ellis, clipboard in hand, moving from piece to piece, confirming what we already knew. Growth rings matched, grain patterns aligned. Even that faint carving, still visible, still undeniable. "It's all from the same source," she said at one point, loud enough for the room to hear. That's when things started to unravel. Staff whispering, some stepping back, like they didn't want to be associated with any of it. One guy actually took off his apron and just left. No words, no questions, just walked out the door. Adrian, though, he stayed planted, but you could see it in his face. The calculation breaking down, the realization setting in that this wasn't something he could talk his way out of. "You can't just come in here and take everything," he said, voice tighter now. "We have clients. We have contracts." "You should have thought about that before you cut down something that wasn't yours," I said, still calm, still steady. The first table went out about 5 minutes later, 2 guys lifting it carefully, like it still mattered what condition it was in, which I appreciated in a strange way. That $12,000 centerpiece, the one they were so proud of, carried right past Adrian and out the front door like it was just another piece of inventory being returned to its rightful place. Then the chairs. Then the coffee table. That one I watched a little longer than the others. As they carried it past me, I caught that faint outline again. The heart, the initials. J and C, Claire and me, still there, even after everything they did to try and erase it. "Make sure that one's handled carefully," I said, more to myself than anyone else. Piece by piece, the room emptied. Wall panels, benches, decorative slabs, anything that came from that tree was tagged, verified, and removed. The space started to look hollow, like a stage after the set's been torn down. Price tags still sitting there, little cards describing craftsmanship and origin, now pointing to nothing. At one point, Adrian just lost it. "This is my business," he snapped, voice breaking through the controlled tone he'd been trying to hold on to. "Do you have any idea what you're doing to me, to my reputation?" I looked at him for a second, really looked this time, not at the branding or the image he'd built, but at the person underneath it. Then I reached into my folder, pulled out the property survey, and that photo, the one from Claire's memorial, her standing under that tree, sunlight coming through the leaves. I handed both to him. "You cut first," I said quietly. "I'm just taking back what you stole." He didn't have anything to say to that. By noon, when the first guests started arriving, dressed up, expecting champagne and a showcase, they walked into a room that looked like it had already been picked clean. Empty spaces where centerpieces should have been, staff standing around unsure of what to do, and Adrian sitting on the floor near the back, just staring at nothing. Nobody stayed long. By 2 o'clock, it was already online. Local news picked it up first, then it spread. Headline after headline, all some variation of the same thing. High-end furniture showcase shut down over stolen materials. Memorial tree turned into luxury goods. People have a way of locking on to stories like that, especially when there's a clear line between right and wrong. By Tuesday, his insurance company denied the claim. Turns out, they don't cover losses tied to illegal sourcing. By Wednesday, his lawyer called mine. Then he called me. Tone was different this time. No polish, no branding, just a man trying to stop something from getting worse. "We're prepared to resolve this," he said. "I'm listening," I replied. We went back and forth for a while. Numbers, terms, conditions. But in the end, I kept it simple. $95,000. That was the assessed value of the furniture they'd made from my tree, plus additional damages. A full written apology, not just to me, but published publicly in the local paper and online. And every remaining piece of that wood returned. No negotiations on those points. There was a long silence after I laid it out. Then finally, a quiet, "We can agree to that." And they did. Within a week, the payment was processed, the apology published, and what was left of that tree came back to me. Not as it once was, not whole, not alive, but still mine. I had some of it reworked later, smaller pieces, things that felt appropriate, a bench, a frame, something I could keep without feeling like I was looking at a price tag. Now, here's the part people always argue about. Some say I went too far, that I could have just taken the money, handled it quietly, let the legal system do its thing without turning it into a public spectacle. Others say I didn't go far enough, that I should have pressed criminal charges, shut them down completely. Truth is, I don't know if there's a clean answer. All I know is, they made a choice. They saw something that wasn't theirs, something that mattered to someone else, and they decided it was worth more, cut down and sold. And I made a choice too. So, I'm curious what you think. If you were in my position, would you have done the same thing, or handled it differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read more of them than you'd expect. And if you want more stories like this, real situations where things don't always fall neatly into right or wrong, hit subscribe. Stick around.